Gaudeamus omnes in Domino Deum festum celebrantes sub honore beati Thomæ Martyris, de cuius passione gaudet Angelus laudant Filium Dei. Exultate Gusti in Domino Rectus Dei Laudatio. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Gaudeamus omnes in Domino Deum festum celebrantes sub honore beati Thomæ Martyris, de cuius passione gaudet Angelus laudant Filium Dei. Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Christe eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison. Gloria in excelsis Deo, et in terra pax hominibus bone voluntatis. Laudamus te, benedicimus te, adoramus te, glorificamus te. Gratias agimus tibi propter magnum gloriam tuam. Domine Deus Rex Celestis, Deus Pater Omnipotens, Domine Filii Unigenite, Iesu Christe, Domine Deus Agnus Dei Filius Patris, qui tollis peccatum mundi, miserere nobis, qui tollis peccatum mundi, suscipe deprecatione nostra, qui sedes et excelem Patris, miserere nobis, quoniam tu solus sanctus, tu solus Dominus, tu solus Altissimus Iesu Christe, cum Sancto Spiritu in gloria Dei Patris. Amen. Pax vobis et cum spiritu tuo. Ordemus. Deus pro cuius ecclesia gloriosus pontifex Thomas gladis impiorum occubuit presta caesimus, ut omnes qui eius implorant auxilium petitionis suae salutarum consequantur effectum, per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum viuda regna Divinitatis Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Orde Da nobis Caesimus Domini imitari corporibus ut escamus et inimicos diligere, quia eius natalitia celebramus, qui novit etiam pro persecutoribus exhorrare, Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum. Ecclesiam tuam Domine venirus illustra, ut beati Ioannis apostoli tui et evangeliste illuminati doctrinis, ad dona perveniat sempiterna. Per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum viuda regna Divinitatis Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Ordemus. Deus cuius odiarne de preconiam innocentes martyres non loquendus et moriendum confessis sunt, omnium in nobis vitiorum male mortificar, ut fidem tuam quam lingua nostra loquetur, et sia moribus vita fetiatur. Concede Caesimus omnipotens Deus, ut nos unigeniti tui nove per candem nativitas liberet, quos peccati iuga vetusta servitus tenet. Per iundum Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum viuda regna Divinitatis Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Lectio Epistolae Beati Pauli Apostoli et Hebreos. Fratres, omnis pontifex ex hominibus assumptus, pro homibus constituitur Deis, qui sunt ad Deum ut offeradora et sacrificia pro peccatis, qui condolere positiis, qui inderant et erant, qualiam et ipse secundatus es infirmitate, et vocteria debit quem modum pro populum ectitar etiam et possemit ipso offere pro peccatis, nec quisquam sumit sibi honorem sequivocatur ad Deo tanquam Aaron, sic et Christus non sebit ipsum clarificavit ut pontifex fierit, sed qui locutus est ad Deum. Filius meius est tu, ego hodie genuit te. Quem ab modum etinario loco dicit, tu esse cedos in aeternum secundum ordinem Melchizedec. Deo gratias. Ecis eccedus magnus, quindi ebus suis platuit Deo, non est inventus similis ili, qui consafare legem excelsi. Alleluia, alleluia. Ego sum pastor bonus, et conosco oves meas, et conoscunt me. Alleluia. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo, sequentia Sancti Evangelii secundum Ioannem, gloria tibi Domine. In illo tempore dixit Iesus Phariseis, ego sum pastor bonus pastor animam suam dat pro ovibus suis, vecinarius autem et qui non est pastor, cuius non sum noves proprie, videt lupem verientem et mitit oves, et fugit, et lupus rapid et dispecit oves. Vecinarius autem fugit, qui animet vecinarius est, et non petinent ad Deum de ovibus. Ego sum pastor bonus, et conosco meas, et conoscunt me. Sicut novi me pater, et ego anosco patrem, et animam meum pono pro ovibus meis, et alias oves habeo, quae non sunt ex hoc ovii, et illas opporte me ducere, et voce meam audient, et fieturem ovile, et unus pastor. Laus tibi Christi. On this, the feast of St. Thomas of Canterbury. The epistle is taken from the letter of St. Paul to the Hebrews. Brethren, the purpose for which any high priest is chosen from among his fellow men and made representative of men in their dealings with God is to offer gifts and sacrifices in expiation of their sins. He is qualified for this by being able to feel for them when they are ignorant and make mistakes, since he too is all beset with humiliations, and for that reason must needs present sin offerings for himself, just as he does for the people. His vocation comes from God, as Aaron's did. Nobody can take on himself such a privilege as this. So it is with Christ. He did not raise himself to the dignity of the high priesthood. It was God that raised him to it when he said, "Thou art my son, I have begotten thee this day." And so elsewhere, "Thou art a priest forever in the line of Melchizedek." And the Holy Gospel is a continuation of that according to St. John. At this time, Jesus said to the Pharisees, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep, whereas the hireling, who is no shepherd and does not claim the sheep as his own, abandons the sheep and takes to flight as soon as he sees the wolf coming. And so the wolf harries the sheep and scatters them. The hireling then takes to flight because he is only a hireling, because he has no concern over the sheep. I am the good shepherd. My sheep are known to me and know me, just as I am known to my Father and know him. And for these sheep I am laying down my life. I have other sheep too, which do not belong to this fold. I must bring them in too. They will listen to my voice. So there will be one fold and one shepherd." Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tui mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Carissimi beloved in Christ, welcome to this broadcast Mass on this, as we said, the feast of St. Thomas of Canterbury, otherwise, of course, famously known as Thomas à Becket. He was Archbishop of Canterbury from 1162 until his murder in the cathedral in 1170. He engaged in conflict with Henry II, King of England, over the rights and privileges of the church, and was murdered by followers of the king in the cathedral. Soon after his death, he was canonized by Pope Alexander III. Becket was born about 1119 or 1120 AD at Cheapside in London on the 21st of December, the feast day, of course, of St. Thomas the Apostle, for whom he was named. He was the son of Gilbert and Matilda. Gilbert's father was from Thierville in the lordship of Brighton in Normandy and was either a small landowner or a petty knight. Matilda was also of Norman descent. Her family originated near Caen. Gilbert was perhaps related to Theobald of Bec, whose family was also from Thierville. Gilbert began his life as a merchant, perhaps in textiles, but by the 1120s he was living in London and was a property owner, living on the rental income from his properties. He also served as the sheriff of the city, and they were buried, Becket's parents, in Old St. Paul's Cathedral. At the age of 10, Becket was sent as a student to Merton Priory, southwest of the city in Surrey. He later attended a grammar school in London, perhaps the one at St. Paul's Cathedral. He did not study any subjects beyond the trivium and quadrivium at these schools. Around the age of 20, he spent about a year in Paris, but he did not study canon or civil law at the time, and his Latin skill always remained somewhat rudimentary. Sometime after Becket began his schooling, Gilbert Becket, his father, suffered financial reverses, and the younger Becket was forced to earn a living as a clerk. Gilbert first secured a place for his son in the business of a relative, Osbert Huidelier. Later, Becket acquired a position in the household of Theobald of Bec, by then Archbishop of Canterbury. Theobald entrusted him with several important missions to Rome and also sent him to Bologna and Auxerre to study canon law. In 1154, Theobald named Becket Archdeacon of Canterbury and other ecclesiastical offices included a number of benefices and prebends at Lincoln Cathedral and St. Paul's Cathedral, and the office of Provost of Beverley. His efficiency in these posts led Theobald to recommend him to Henry II for the vacant post of Lord Chancellor, to which Becket was appointed in January 1155. As Lord Chancellor of England, Becket enforced the king's traditional sources of revenue that were exacted from all landowners, including churches and bishoprics. King Henry sent his son Henry to live in Becket's household, it being the custom then for noble children to be fostered out to other noble houses. Becket was nominated as Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162, several months after the death of Theobald. His election was confirmed on the 23rd of May by a royal council of bishops and noblemen. Henry may have hoped that Becket would continue to put royal government first rather than the church, but the famed transformation of Becket into an ascetic occurred at this time. Becket was ordained a priest on the 2nd of June 1162 at Canterbury, and on the 3rd of June 1162, so the next day, was consecrated as Archbishop by Henry of Blois, the Bishop of Winchester, and the other suffragan bishops of Canterbury. A rift now grew between Henry and Becket as the new Archbishop resigned his chancellorship and sought to recover and extend the rights of the archbishopric. This led to a series of conflicts with the king, including one over the jurisdiction of secular courts over English clergymen, which accelerated antipathy between Becket and the king. Attempts by Henry to influence other bishops against Becket began in Westminster in October 1163, where the king sought approval of the traditional rights of royal government in regard to the church. This led to the constitutions of Clarendon, where Becket was officially asked to agree to the king's rights or face political repercussions. Henry presided over assemblies of the higher English clergy at Clarendon Palace on the 30th of January 1164. In 16 constitutions, he sought less clerical independence and weaker connections with Rome. He used his skills to induce their consent and apparently succeeded with all but Becket. Finally, even Becket expressed willingness to agree to the substance of the constitutions, but he still refused formally to sign the documents. Henry summoned Becket to appear before a great council at Northampton Castle on the 8th of October 1164 to answer allegations of contempt of royal authority and malfeasance in the Chancellor's office. Convicted on the charges, Becket stormed out of the trial and fled to the continent. Henry pursued the fugitive archbishop with a series of edicts targeting Becket and all Becket's friends and supporters, but King Louis VII of France offered Becket protection. He spent nearly 2 years in the Cistercian abbey of Pontagny until Henry's threats against the order obliged him to return to Sens. Becket fought back by threatening excommunication and an interdict against the king and bishops and the kingdom. But Alexander III, though sympathizing with him, favored a more diplomatic approach. Papal legates were sent in 1167 with authority to act as arbitrators. In 1170, Alexander sent delegates to impose a solution to the dispute. At that point, Henry offered a compromise that would allow Thomas to return to England from exile. This he did, and was greeted with high acclaim by the populace, and as he approached Canterbury. This news got back to Henry, who was not amused. In November 1170, Becket excommunicated Roger de Pont-l'Evêque, Archbishop of York, with Gilbert Folliot, Bishop of London, and Jocelyn de Bohun, Bishop of Salisbury, for crowning the heir apparent, the young Henry. This apparently breached Canterbury's privilege of coronation. On hearing reports of Becket's actions, Henry, who was in France, said to have uttered words interpreted by his men as wishing Becket killed. The famous words are, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest, of this troublesome priest?" The exact wording apparently is in doubt, but there are several versions reported. But according to the historian Simon Schlammer, he believes the quote I just gave is incorrect. He accepts the account of the contemporary Edward Grimm, who gives, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and brought up in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born cleric." Not quite as pithy or as witty as the former, but many other variants have found their way into popular culture. Whatever Henry said, it was interpreted as a royal command, and 4 knights, Reginald Fitzurse, Hugh de Morville, William de Tracy, and Richard le Breton, set out to confront the Archbishop of Canterbury. On the 29th of December 1170, they arrived. According to accounts by the monk Gervase of Canterbury and eyewitness Edward Grimm, they placed their weapons under a tree outside the cathedral and hid their armour under cloaks before entering to challenge Becket. The knights told Becket he was to go to Winchester to give an account of his actions, but Becket refused. Not until he refused their demands to submit to the king's will did they retrieve their weapons and rush back inside for the killing. Becket, meanwhile, proceeded to the main hall for vespers. The other monks tried to bolt themselves in for safety, but Becket said to them, "It is not right to make a fortress out of the house of prayer," ordering them to reopen the doors. The 4 knights, wielding drawn swords, ran into the room crying, "Where is Thomas Becket, traitor to the king and country?" They found Becket in a spot near a door to the monastic cloister, the stairs into the crypt and the stairs leading up into the choir of the cathedral where the monks were chanting vespers. On seeing them, Becket said, "I am no traitor and I am ready to die." One knight grabbed him and tried to pull him outside, but Becket grabbed onto a pillar and bowed his head to make peace with God. Several contemporary accounts of what happened next exist. Of particular note is that of Edward Grimm, who was wounded in the attack, and this is part of his account. The impious knight suddenly set upon him and shaved off the summit of his crown, which the sacred chrism had consecrated to God. Then with another blow received on the head he remained firm, but with a third the stricken martyr bent his knees and elbows, offering himself as a living sacrifice, saying in a low voice, "For the name of Jesus and the protection of the church, I am ready to embrace death." But the third knight inflicted a grave wound on the fallen one. With this blow, his crown, which was large, separated from his head, so that the blood turned white from the brain, yet no less did the brain turn red from the blood. It purpled the appearance of the church. The 5th, not a knight but a cleric who had entered with the knights, placed his foot on the neck of the holy priest and precious martyr, and, it is horrible to say, scattered the brains with the blood across the floor, exclaiming to the rest, "We can leave this place, knights, he will not get up again." After Becket's death, the monks prepared Becket's body for burial and found that Becket had worn a hair shirt under his archbishop's garments, a sign of penance. Soon after, the faithful throughout Europe began venerating Becket as a martyr, and on the 21st of February 1173, less than 2 years after his death, he was canonized by Pope Alexander III in St. Peter's Church in Segni. In 1173, Becket's sister Mary was appointed Abbess of Barking as reparation for the murder of her brother. And on the 12th of July 1174, amidst the revolt, Henry humbled himself in public penance at Becket's tomb and at the church of St. Dunstan's, which became a most popular pilgrimage site. Becket's assassins fled north to de Morville's Knaresborough Castle for about a year. De Morville also held property in Cumbria, and this too may have provided a hiding place as the men prepared for a longer stay in the separate kingdom of Scotland. They were not arrested, and Henry did not confiscate their lands, but he did not help them when they sought his advice in August 1171. Pope Alexander excommunicated all 4. Seeking forgiveness, the assassins travelled to Rome, where the Pope ordered them to serve as knights in the Holy Lands for a period of 14 years. This sentence also inspired the Knights of St. Thomas, incorporated in 1191 at Acre, and which was to be modelled on the Teutonic Knights. This was the only military order native to England, just as the Gilbertine order was the only monastic order native to England. Henry VIII dissolved both of these during the Reformation, rather than merging them with foreign orders or nationalising them as elements of the Church of England. Then there was erected at Canterbury a great shrine, and up until the Reformation was a major, probably the major place of pilgrimage in England. Now it seems Holy Apostolate that this feast of St. Thomas should fall as it does amidst the tumult, the maelstrom of crises in the Church at this present time, where we have a Pope actively attempting to put down the traditional liturgy of the Church, extant for over 1,500 years. I keep saying it, but these are exceptional times. But there is a great lesson that we might learn from the example of Thomas Becket, and that is to remain steadfast to that which we know and believe to be the truth. Speaking of the Reformation and Henry VIII, there were, of course, another two famous Thomases connected with Henry, but also connected with Thomas Becket, for they have both been named for him. Yet both would venture upon different policies which yet serve as a lesson to us today. The first was Thomas Cardinal Wolsey, Archbishop of York and Chancellor of England, like Thomas Becket had been. But Thomas Wolsey capitulated to the secularism of his age. He grew wealthy, extremely wealthy, rich. He grew greedy on power and material assets, and eventually, of course, fell foul of the king and died an ignominious death. The other Thomas was one St. Thomas More, who was not a cleric but a lawyer, but of course was extremely learned in canon law and theology, as many in those days were. People tended to study both civil and canon law, and then either become lawyers or become clerics. But though he was not a cleric, St. Thomas More, or St. Thomas More as he was in his life, was a better Christian, we might say, than the Cardinal Wolsey. Thomas was known for living a Christian life. When the king's great matter came about, wherein Henry sought first a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and secondly, wanted to place himself as head of the church in England, Sir Thomas More, in all consciousness, could not sign the oath of allegiance and fidelity and accept this change in situation. And for that, he also endured a martyr's death. What I mean to say here is that whether one capitulates and goes with the world, one still ends in death. And though one might stay on the cause of righteousness and be steadfast, probably one will still end up dead. What is important, however, is what happens after one's death. Both Becket and Moore became saints, both canonized, both efficacious in their intercession for those who asked their prayers, both enjoying the beatific vision, both with Jesus. What of Wolsey? Who knows? Perhaps Wolsey was able to make a full confession on his deathbed. Perhaps Wolsey had had just enough goodness in his earlier life and career to earn him a place in purgatory. Or perhaps he suffered the fate of not just mortal but eternal death. Either way, his name, of course, is infamous and synonymous for many with greed and excess of earthly power and riches. He it was, you may recall, who built Hampton Court Palace, originally for himself. Only when things were going sour with the king did he gift it to the king, thinking he would receive the king's favour. Now, in our own time, we are faced, sadly, with the predicament of having to resist not only the world, the secular society, but also, too, from within, those powers that are literally corrupting and diseasing the church. What we must be careful to avoid is a spiritual death, which in the present situation would mean capitulating to the attack on tradition and giving up the fight for tradition, succumbing to the Novus Ordo and just going along with the zeitgeist. This mission, this chapel exists exactly to preserve and to perpetuate the perennial tradition and magisterium of the church. And we do so with the support and benefaction of many of you, for which we are grateful. But we have been about this for some 170 years, fighting for the preservation of true, authentic, Catholic, primitive tradition in the Church of Rome. And we will continue to do so, irrespective of Pope Francis, and probably irrespective of whoever follows him. Because what matters is the Orthodox faith. What matters is the voice of the one true good shepherd, our Lord Jesus Christ himself, whose voice may be heard in the authentic tradition of the church. That which has always been believed everywhere and by all. This we hold fast to, because by this is our salvation assured. People ask, well, what about the Novus Ordo? What about the new Mass? What about the new rites of sacraments, etc.? To which I can only and honestly answer, I don't know. I am not convinced of their validity, of their licity, of their effectualness. But I have no need to concern myself then with them when I have the traditional Latin Mass and the traditional rites and sacraments administered by priests and bishops ordained with those same traditional rites going back all the way to the apostles. Why bother with uncertainty when I have the certainty and the knowledge of the true faith and true sacraments? This, my brothers and sisters, I urge you to consider and to reflect upon yourselves. Yes, we could all more easily go the way of Thomas Wolsey. We could all capitulate, just accept the status quo for the sake of reputation, for the sake of ease and comfort, but doing so threatening our immortal souls. Or we can follow after the example of Thomas Becket and more, and at least assure for ourselves our place in heaven, remaining steadfast to that which we know to be true. Let us seek the intercession of both St. Thomas Becket and St. Thomas More today. Let us ask for the strength and the courage and the confidence such as they had to resist evil, to resist ease and comfort, and instead remain steadfast, even though unlikely in our case to be necessary, even unto death. We must, my brothers and sisters, preserve the Catholic faith. It is our obligation. It is our duty. And for many of us, it is actually our joy. Let us encourage others to join us in the fight for tradition. And it is perfectly permissible for us to resist that which is evil. And it is evil that seeks to overthrow and lose for the Church today and future generations her most precious treasury in that which has always been believed everywhere and by all, and in the perennial lex orandi, lex credendi, and even lex vivendi of the Church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Credo in unum Deum, Patrem omnipotentem, Factorum Caeli et Terrae, visibilium omnium et invisibilium, et in unum Dominum Iesum Christum Filium Dei unigenitum, et ex Patri nantem ante omnia saecula, Deum de Deo lumen de lumine, Deum verum de Deo vero, genitum non factum consubstantialem Patri, per quam omnia facta sunt, qui propter nos homines, propter nostrum salutem, descendi de celis, et incarnatus est Spiritus Sancto ex Maria Virgine, et homo factus est. Crucifixus etiam pro nobis Pontio Pilato passus et sepultus est, et resurrexit tertiet die secundum Scripturas, et descendit in caelum sedit et dexteram Patris, et iterum venturus est cum gloria judicare vivus et mortuus, cuius reni non erit finis, et in Spiritum Sanctum Dominum et vivificantem, qui ex Patre procedit, qui cum Patri et Filios et adorator cum glorificatur, qui locutus est per prophetas, et unam sanctam catholicam et apostolicam ecclesiam, confitio unum baptismo in remissionem peccatorum, et expecto resurrectionem mortuorum, et vitam venturi saeculi. Amen. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. Oremus. Oscivisti Thomæ in capitebus sacrorum de lapide precioso, vitam persitate et tribuistiae. Alleluia. Per omnia saecula saeculorum.
Amen.
Amen. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. susum corda, habemus ad Dominum, gratias Gaudeamus Domino Deo nostro, dignum et justum est, deveni dignum et justum est ecum salutare, nos tibi sempre tuvi, quae gratias agere, Domine Sancte Pater, omnipotens aeterne Deus, quia per incarnati verbe mysterium novamentis nostri oculis lux tuae claritatis infusit, ut visibiliter Deum cognoscimus per conc in invisibilium amorem nepiamur, et ideo cum geris ad Angelus controlis et dominationibus cumque omnibus celestis exercitus, in num gloriae tuae canimus, sine fine dicentes. Sanctus, 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 Dominus Deus sabaoth, pleni sunt celi et terra gloria tua, Hosanna in excelsis. Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini, Hosanna in excelsis. nobis quoque vegetoribus. Per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Ore preceti salutaribus morti divinis nuntione formati, audemus dicere. Pater noster, qui eis in caeli, sanctificetur nomen tuum, veat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, dimita nobis debita nostra, sicur nos dimitimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Pax Domini sit semper vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccatum mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccatum mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccatum mundi, dona nobis pace. Domine non sundimus, Domine non sundimus, Domine non sundimus. Confitio Deo omnipotenti, beate Maria sempre Virgine, beato Michael Arcangelo, beato Ioanni Battista, sanctis apostolis Petro et Paulo, omnibus sanctis et tibi pater, quia peccavi minimis cogitatione verbo et opere, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Io prego beata Mariam sempre Virginem, beatum Michael Arcangelo, beatum Ioannem Baptistam, sanctus apostolos Petro et Paulum, omnes sanctos et te pater, ora pro me, ad Dominum Deum nostrum. Misericordia vesci potens Deus et misericordatis vestris perucat vossa vita aeterna. Amen. Indulgentiam assumptionem et remissionem peccatorum vostrorum, tribu et vobis omnipotens misericors Dominus. Amen. ecce agnus Dei, ecce qui tollit peccatum mundi. Domine non sum dignus ut interressu tectum meum, sed tantum dic verbo et senabitur anima mea. Domine non sum dignus ut interressu tectum meum, sed tantum dic verbo et senabitur anima mea. Domine non sum dignus ut interressu tectum meum, sed tantum dic verbo et senabitur anima mea. Brothers and sisters watching Mass online and unable therefore to receive the Blessed Sacrament, we invite you now to make an act of spiritual communion. My Jesus, I believe that thou art present in the Blessed Sacrament. I love thee above all things, and I desire thee in my soul. Since I cannot now receive thee sacramentally, come at least spiritually into my heart. As though thou wert already there, I embrace thee and unite myself wholly to thee. Permit not that I should ever be separated from thee. Amen. Egus sum pastor bonus, e conosco oves meas, e conoscunt me mei. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. Ordemus. Ec nos communio Domine portion ac crimine, et intercedente beatu Thomæ martyre tuo, atquae pontifice, celestis remedii facetes et consortes. Per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum vivit regnat in unitatis Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Ordemus. Auxilientum nobis Domini sumpta mysteria, et intercedente beatus Stefano martyre tuo, sempiterna protectione conferment. Refletici tu celesti Deus nostre, et te supplices te precamur, ut in cuius haec memoratione percepimus, eus muniamur et precimus. Votiva Domine dona percipimus, quae sanctorum nobis precimus, et presentis Christus vitae paritatis aeterna et liberi confere subsidium. Per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum vivit regnat in unitatis Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Ordemus. Resta Christus omnipotens Deus, natus hodie salvator mundi, sicut divine nobis generationis est autor, ita et immortalitatis sit ipse lagitur, qui tecum vivit regnat in unitatis Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo, ite missa est. Deo gratias. Sit nomen Domini benedictum, ex hoc nunc usque in saecula, hodie nostrum in nomine Domini, qui feci caelum et terram, benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo, initium sancti Evangelii secundum Ioannem. Gloria a tibi, Domine. In principio era il verbum, et verbum erat Deum, et Deus erat verbum. Hoc erat in principio apud Deum, omnipresum factus, non simso factum nihil, quo factum est. In ipso vita erat lux hominum, et lux in tenebris luce et tenebrae non comprehenderunt. Fuit homo missus et cum nomen rationales. Hic veritas testimonium veritum lumen et omnes credunt verum. Non erit lux, sed testimonium veritum lumen. Ere lux vere quae luminat omnem hominem venientem in hoc mundum. In mundo venatum mundus resum factus est, mundus non coniovit, propria veritas sum non ceperunt. Quodquam autem ceperunt est, forestatim filios Dei fieri qui credi nomine eus. Qui non sanguinibus nec voluntate carnis, nec voluntate filii, et ex Deo nati sunt. Et verbum carno factum est, et habitavit in nobis, et venibus gloriam eis, gloriam quas in celeti a Patre, plenum gratiae veritatis. Deo gratias.